Subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon to never miss any update from Rouse IAS Study Circle. Join the only official Telegram channel of Rouse IAS Study Circle to get the relevant materials and important updates. Hello and welcome to the Daily News Simplified. The what, why, and how of the newspaper analysis from the Civil Services Examinations perspective. So today we are going to discuss the Hindu Daily Edition dated 6 February 2022 and some few important articles and topics from the Indian Express Explained section of the last week. The topics to be discussed have been displayed on your screen and the timestamping of the same has been provided in the description box below. So now let us begin with our first topic. This topic has appeared in today's The Hindu edition at page number 10. And this topic is especially from the science and tech section. Every year in preliminary examination, there are several questions which are asked from this particular area, that is science and tech. And many a times it has been witnessed that various questions from the space sections are also asked. As you can see that this topic is talking about the solar storms and has come in the context that recently scientists have analyzed the ice cores from two areas, that is Greenland and Antarctica, and have found an evidence that the extreme solar storm that occurred about 9,200 years ago. Now, if we restrict ourselves to this very information, this evidence or this new finding was not of very relevance. But what makes it more relevant and interesting is that it has given rise to a puzzle into the minds of the scientific communities. The reason being that the time which they are talking about is that around 9,000 years ago, at that time, the planet was less exposed to the solar events. This period was still now believed at one of the sun's most quiet phases. And in this quiet phase, if we are getting the evidence of the one of the most extreme solar storms, then obviously it becomes a puzzle. However, from the examination's point of view, you need to know certain basic aspects, certain basic concepts related to this solar storm. You don't have to go in much detail in analyzing these topics. However, you need to be crystal clear about the basic definition of the terminologies which are associated with the solar storm. And in this very sense, we will discuss some of those basic terminologies with the help of an illustration also. This illustration will make you better understand and differentiate between various terms, sometimes confusing a bit in nature too. So first of all, the basic term is that what is the solar activity? Now as you can see in this picture, the sun is undergoing the solar activity. Now the solar activity is a general term which consists of solar flares, coronal mass ejections, high-speed solar winds, and solar energetic particles. All these things comprise and together become the solar activity. We will discuss that what do we mean by solar flares, coronal mass ejections, etc. But for now, the solar activity is a general term which consists of flares, CMEs, the coronal mass ejections, and the high speed solar winds. Now, this solar activity is basically driven by the solar magnetic field. If you go into the basic sciences of your class 9th or 10th, you know that there is a magnetic field around the sun. And that is why the sun is called as a magnetic variable star that fluctuates on time scales ranging from a fraction of seconds to billions of years. So our first definition was the solar activity. Now comes the second concept, which is the solar flare. Now this picture represents the solar flare. As you can see here, this particular area is representing the burst of the radiations coming out from the release of the magnetic energy. This burst of radiation, or we can also call it one of the most explosive events of the sun, are called as solar flares. The technical definition goes like this, that solar flare is an intense burst of radiation coming from the release of the magnetic energy associated with the sunspots. Now, what are these sunspots? We'll discuss it also. But for now, the solar flare is a burst of radiations. They are one of the largest explosive events and are seen as bright areas. You can see that this portion is so bright. Bright areas on the sun, they can last from minutes to hours. And how we can see these solar flares? We can see this with the help of light, or technically called as photons. When the solar flares occur, the photons are released, and from those photons, the light is released, which reaches our eyes. The primary waves we monitor flares are in X-rays and the optical light. Further, as you can see that this is because the explosive event, various particles like electrons, protons and heavy particles get accelerated tremendously. Now we'll move to the third concept, which is the solar prominence. Now what is solar prominence? This picture shows the solar prominence. As you can see here that there is a feature which is extending out from the sun towards the sun's atmosphere. Now this specific feature is the solar prominence. It is a large bright feature extending outward from the sun's surface and extends outwards into the sun's hot outer atmosphere called corona. This means that these solar prominences are formed in corona. What is this corona? Corona is the hot outer atmosphere. Now the time scale of these solar prominences can be as short as reaching to few days, and they can be as long as reaching few months. But the aerial expanse of these solar prominences is very large. They can extend up to hundreds to thousands of miles into space. But the reasons that why these prominences are found is yet to be known. The scientists are still researching how and why prominences are formed. Now we'll study that what was the CME, that is the coronal mass ejections. Now this is a very simple term and the name is telling you that what exactly do we mean by the coronal mass ejections. Now what happens is that the outer solar atmosphere, that is this area, the corona is structured by strong magnetic fields and the fields are generally closed over the sunspot groups. Now, as soon as over the sunspot group these fields become closer, the confined solar atmosphere violently releases the bubbles of gas and magnetic fields. These bubbles of gas and magnetic fields are known as the coronal mass ejections. And you will be very surprised to know that a large CME can contain a billion tons of matter that can be accelerated to several billion miles per hour in a spectacular explosion. Now just imagine the intensity of the magnetic field around this matter. Billion of tons of matter is accelerating at million miles per hour. That is the beauty of a space system, that we cannot even imagine that what is going over there. Now comes the concept of sunspots. Now what are sunspots? Again this picture is showing you that the outer surface is of the sun and this area is the sunspot. As you can see that here we have a brighter surface and here we have a darker surface. So the sunspots are the dark areas on the solar surface which contain the strong magnetic fields that are constantly shifting. What happens is that the strong magnetic fields from the surface of the sun comes out and allow this particular area to cool down slightly. Now the cooling of this surface is not that the temperature will reduce to minus degree centigrades. No, it is not like that. We all know that the average temperature of the surface of the sun is around 6000 degrees Celsius. So the temperature of the sunspots, which we are calling as dark or the cooler areas, is around 4000 degrees Celsius. So obviously it is enough to burn you and me, but we are talking this reduction of temperature in relative terms. Obviously, there is a reduction of around 2000 degrees Celsius. They take around 27 days to make a complete rotation as seen from the Earth. Further, these sunspots remain more or less in a place on the sun, and these group of sunspots are often the sites of solar flares. From these areas, the solar flares generate. Further, the scientists have also told us that there are periodic variations or the cycles of high and low activity of the sun. In certain time period there are high solar activity and in the other time there is a low solar activity, and there is a periodical alteration of these activities. In general these cycles repeat approximately after 11 years, although there are certain cycles which have repeated themselves at 9 years interval and the other which have repeated themselves at the 14 years interval too. The sunspot cycle is the useful way to mark the changes in the sun. Now there are two important terms. One is the solar minimum and other is the solar maximum. Now, as the name suggests, the solar minimum refers to the period of several Earth years when the number of sunspots is lowest. That is why it is called as minimum. Solar minimum will be the period whereby the sunspots is lowest, and the solar maximum will be the period whereby the activity on the sun and the effects of space weather on our terrestrial environment are high. Now, if you closely look at this illustration, this is the period of solar minimum. And from this, the intensity of the solar activity is rising, and here we have reached to the solar maximum. Again, after this maximum has reached, the solar activity continues to decline, and again it reaches to the solar minimum position. Now you may not be able to see the time scale which is mentioned over here. So for you, I am telling you that this first solar minimum is mentioned in the year of 1996. And after completing the one whole cycle in the end, when it again has the solar minimum, the year mentioned is 2006. So if you consider 1996 as the first year, this is a typical 11-year cycle which we were discussing over here. So now we will revise this topic once again in order to help you to memorize these definitions now and now only, so that it gets printed on your mind. The first definition which we discussed was the solar activity, which is a general term consisting of solar flares, coronal mass ejections, high speed solar wind, and the solar energy particles. Then we discussed that what are solar flares. Solar flare is an intense burst of radiation which is one of the largest explosive events on our solar surface. In the third, we discussed that what are solar prominence. The solar prominence are the large and bright feature which extend outwards from the sun's surface in the outer hot atmosphere of the sun known as corona. Then we discussed that what are coronal mass ejections. The coronal mass ejections are the ejections of the matter having strong magnetic field and having a very high acceleration value in the outer atmosphere of the sun. Further, the sunspots are the dark and the cool areas on the solar surface which are found due to emerging out of the magnetic field from this very surface. Then we looked that there are certain periodic variations or cycles in the solar activity. The solar minimum occurs when the sunspot is at lowest, and the solar maximum occurs when the sunspot activity is at highest. Generally, a 11-year time scale is followed for this solar activity. So I hope that these basic definitions, the one-liners, are clear to you and you'll mark the correct answer in your UPSC Prelims exam. Now this topic has appeared in today's The Hindu edition at page number 10, and this topic is in relation to the pollution control in Antarctic, the experiments going over there to control the plastic pollution with the help of microbes. So this is the very context of this news, that the team of Argentinian scientists is using the microorganisms which are native to the Antarctica to explore the idea of cleaning up the pollution from fuels and potentially plastics in the pristine expanses of the white continent. Now, this is a very brief topic, however, from the preliminary examinations point of view, you need to be aware about two important things which are in relation to this very topic. The first is a term which you might have come across several times in newspapers, in your notes, and other materials. The term is the bioremediation. Now, what do we mean by bioremediation? Now, bioremediation is basically a branch of biotechnology that employs the use of the living organisms. That means that the living organisms are being used under this technology, that is bioremediation. The living organisms can be like microbes, bacteria, etc. And these organisms are being used for the removal of the contaminants, pollutants, and toxins from multiple areas like soil, water, and other environmental ecosystems. Further, the bioremediation technology is also used to clean up the oil spills and the contaminated groundwater. Now, this technology is very important because it is one of the cleanest methods whereby you can conserve the environment and control the pollution. Further, this technology is based on a natural principle because whatever waste is generated by anthropogenic factors, that becomes the food for the microorganisms. And then whatever waste will be generated by microorganisms, it can become, let's say, feed for the soil. So if you analyze the complete cycle, the waste which were generated by the humans at the end are converted as a feed to the soil, which can make the soil nutrient rich. So this was the first thing which I wanted to tell you regarding this topic. And the other important thing which is also mentioned in this news article, which is the 1961 Madrid Protocol. So this 1961 Madrid Protocol is a very short protocol. However, the basic theme, the crux, the subject of this protocol is that it is aimed to control the environment of the Antarctic ecosystem. That is why formally it is known as the Protocol on Environmental Protection to the Antarctic Treaty. Further, from time to time, various treaties and conventions are being developed under this particular treaty, and that is why all these things come under a generic name of Antarctic Treaty System or the Madrid Protocol. Now, the treaty applies to the area south of the 60 degrees south latitude. Now, this is very important because these can be certain statements in the multiple choice questions which you can have in your prelims examination. The first one is that 1961 Madrid Protocol deals with the protection and conservation of the Antarctic ecosystem. And the second thing is that this treaty is applicable to the areas south of the 60 degrees south latitude, which means that it is just concentrated in the southern hemisphere and not in the northern hemisphere because the name is Antarctic. So do not get confused that this treaty might take both the poles into account. No, it does not. This treaty says that the Antarctica should be used exclusively for the peaceful purposes. It bans military activities such as the establishment of military bases in the Antarctic. Further, it also guarantees the freedom to conduct scientific research along with promoting international scientific cooperation, including the exchange of research plans and personnel. Further, because we have already discussed that it can be exclusively used for the peaceful purposes, it also prohibits the nuclear explosions and disposal of the radioactive waste. Next very important thing in this treaty is that it also encompasses the dispute settlement procedure and a mechanism by which the treaty can be modified. So initially 12 member states negotiated this treaty in 1959 which came into force in 1961. However, the treaty says that any member of the United Nations can accede to this. Specific details under this treaty, the Article 3 states that the protection of the Antarctic environment as a wilderness with aesthetic and scientific value shall be a fundamental consideration of the activities in this area. Now, this particular Article 3 gives you the broader theme of this very treaty. This treaty is not just limited in the sense of the scientific research, but it is also taking the aesthetic value as well as the environmental importance of the Antarctic ecosystem. Further, Article 8 requires the environmental assessment for all the activities, including the tourism. And Article 11 creates a committee for the environmental protection for the continent. As we have discussed that earlier, this treaty was negotiated by only 12 countries, but now the list has gone to 54 countries, including the powerful new Antarctic Treaty parties. Now, again, this very term is very important. The new Antarctic Treaty parties, and under this group of 54 countries, we also have China, Germany, and India. Further, in the beginning, we came across one very important term, the Antarctic Treaty System. We said that many conventions and treaties which are taking place under this is generally known as the Antarctic Treaty System, and it encompasses the additional instruments such as 1972 Seals Convention, 1980 Marine Living Resources Convention, and further again 1991 Madrid Protocol. So this was a very factual topic, I understand this, but it was relevant from your prelims examination. That's why I had to discuss this topic. Now we have the other topic which is titled Mystery Illness. This topic has appeared in today's The Hindu edition at page number 11. Now this topic talks about an important terminology that is Havana Syndrome, and this term is making a huge buzz in newspapers these days. So this topic is purely factual in nature because you need to be aware about the fact that what do we mean by Havana syndrome. And that is why this topic is mostly relevant from the prelims examinations point of view. The context of this topic is that the US intelligence report says that the Havana syndrome, a collection of the symptoms and related brain injuries reported by the US officials, particularly diplomats in embassies. So in this very regard, we'll discuss that what is the Havana syndrome and what are the causes leading to the Havana syndrome. Havana syndrome is basically a health condition. It was reported by several intelligence agencies as well as ambassadors of the US particularly that the personnel are reporting specific type of health related issues which is known as Havana syndrome. And these health issues are specifically suffered by the ambassadors which are posted in countries like Cuba. So, what is Havana syndrome? Havana syndrome basically relates to the neurological issues which are characterized by the symptoms of dizziness, hearing loss, headache, nausea, and memory loss. Now, if we talk about the causes, the exact causes of the Havana syndromes are not known yet. Despite this fact, the studies which have taken place till now have come up with two important reasons behind Havana syndrome. Let me remind you again that these symptoms do not have much scientific evidences because the researches are still under progress. However, till now, it has been said that either the syndrome is because of the directed microwave radiation or due to the pulsed electromagnetic waves. There are several conspiracy theories also around this Havana syndrome. Many have said that this was a targeted strategy against the US officials in these countries. So that is why several intelligence agencies are involved in understanding the root causes and the consequences of this particular syndrome. So from the prelims point of view, you need to know that what is this term which is there recently in news relates to. Moving to the next topic from the Indian Express Explained section. This topic is in relation to the recent announcement which has been made by our finance minister during her budget speech in relation to the taxation of the virtual digital assets. So, for the last few years, there has been a continuous confusion over the legality, over the legal status of the digital currencies in India. In this regard, the announcement made by Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman during her budget speech about the announcement of the 30% tax on the income from the virtual digital assets gained a huge significance. But for you people, from the examination point of view, two words are very important. One is the digital assets, and the other one is the digital currency. So you should keep this in mind that the 30% taxation is on the income from the virtual digital assets. The word used over here is the asset and not the currency. So if there are two words, that means that there will be two meanings also. And that is what in this session we are going to discuss. Under this session we will discuss that what are the basic differences between the digital currency and digital assets. This section falls under the General Studies paper 3 in the section of the economic development, or question from this section can also be asked under the section of technology, because at the root of these digital assets and digital currency is a technological revolution known as the blockchain technology. So moving our session ahead, we'll now discuss the difference between the digital currency and digital assets. So the very first thing is from the basic economy. What do you understand by some currency? Whether it is rupee or dollar or euro or pound or anything. But what is that thing which defines a currency? The currency is anything which has a monetary value, but more importantly, it is issued by the central bank. That is what the currency is called. Because, for example, let us go back to the barter system and let us start follow the barter system for now. So let us assume that I want a bucket of tomatoes from you and you want a bucket of potatoes. So what will happen? I'll go to you, I'll ask for tomatoes, you'll give me the tomatoes, and in return, if I will be having potatoes, I will give you the potatoes. So this is what is called as the barter system. Even here, the exchange has been made, but there is no currency which is used in this transaction. We have just used the commodities which are not issued by the central bank. But suppose I have to buy some tomatoes from you, so I go to you and I take the tomatoes and in return I give you some rupees. Now this rupee is issued by the central bank which has a legal tender. And only those things which are issued by the central bank will be called as currency. So there are three important components of currency. The first one is that all the currencies are the legal tender. By legal tender, it means that those currencies are backed by government. No one in this country can refuse to take the transaction in rupees because it is a legal tender and we are under obligation to transact the things with the medium of currency, that is rupee, because it is backed by the government. The second important thing is, because here we are talking about the digital currency, this digital currency is backed by the blockchain technology. Now, a lot of discussion has already been made on the blockchain technology in the previous DNS regarding the cryptocurrency. So, that is why we are not going into details of this technology. And the third thing of the currency is that it is interchangeable in nature with the fiat currency. Now, many a times this legal tender and fiat currency words are used interchangeably because they sound similar, but there is a very slight difference in the legal tender and the fiat currency. The legal tender is backed by government. That means any currency which is backed by the government will be called as a legal tender. For example, let us go to the medieval times and we imagine about the dums, the copper coins or the gold coins or the silver coins which were at that time used as a means of transaction. So even those things were backed by the government. So at that time those were the legal tender. But now what is fiat currency? Fiat currency is any currency which is not backed by the physical commodity, for example gold. Now let us take the example of rupee. Now rupee is backed by a government, that is why it is a legal tender. But the rupee is not backed by a physical commodity like gold or silver or bronze or copper or diamond, anything like that. That is why it is a fiat currency also. So even the digital currency will not be backed by any physical commodity. That is why it will be also a fiat currency along with the legal tender. But now the point is that what are digital assets? Our finance minister has said to tax the profits which are incurred upon the digital assets and not the digital currency, because this currency will come in the next fiscal year by the RBI, but the digital assets are already there in the market. Now digital assets is every that thing which is not issued by the central bank, that is it is created by the individuals. For example, if we talk about the bitcoins, now bitcoins are not backed by the government, they are not issued by the central bank. It was created by an individual. So all the earnings which will be incurred upon selling or purchasing the bitcoins will be a digital asset and not the digital currency. And the 30% tax on the profit which is mentioned in this year's budget is on the digital assets and not the currency. So the digital asset will be any information or code or number or token which will be having a cryptographic generation, having an inherent value, which will also function as a store of value as well as the unit of account. Now again going to the basic economy. If you can recollect these three terms which you have already studied, these three terms define what we today call as money or the functions of money. So in this very regard, digital asset will also have an inherent value, it will function as store of value and it will be a unit of account. Moreover, it will be transferred, stored or traded electronically. Again, as we have already discussed, that digital asset will not be a currency and that currency might be Indian or might be a foreign currency. Everything which is not the national or international currency having the inherent value, functioning as store of value, having a unit of account and which can be transferred, stored or traded electronically will be called as digital assets. So I hope this basic definition, the concept of the digital currency and digital asset is clear to you. Now our next topic is from the Indian Express Explained section in the context of the Ramsar sites. Under this session we will discuss that what are Ramsar sites, what is the Ramsar Convention and what is the recent context in which we are studying this news. So first of all, the context of this news is that recently the Ramsar Convention on the Wetlands has designated two new Ramsar sites in India. One of those Ramsar sites is the Khejadia Bird Sanctuary, which is in the state of Gujarat near Jamnagar, and the other site is the Bakhira Wildlife Sanctuary, which is in the state of Uttar Pradesh. The Ramsar Convention is known to designate the wetlands as the wetlands of international importance. From the examinations point of view, you must be aware about the Ramsar Convention as well as the various Ramsar sites which are there in India. Because the question from this section can be asked from the maps point of view in the prelims. And in the mains, the topic lies under the paper of General Studies paper 3 in the section of environment and the micro section related to the conservation of the environment. So in this very regard, we will discuss that what is a Ramsar Convention. Ramsar Convention is an intergovernmental treaty which governs cooperation, conservation, and wise use of the resources of the wetlands. The Ramsar Convention has a clear legal definition of the wetlands also. And similarly, India's own wetland conservation rules have defined their wetlands. There is a slight difference in the definition of the wetlands as per the Ramsar Convention and as per the India. So we will discuss that what is that slight difference. First of all, we'll understand the concept of the wetlands with regard to the Ramsar Convention. So as the name suggests that wetlands will be those areas, those pieces of land which will be partially or completely submerged under water. That is why it is wet in nature. So Ramsar Convention gives a very flexible definition of wetlands. According to it, any marsh, fen, peatland or water submerged area which can be either natural or artificial, which can be permanent or temporary, which can be static or flowing, which can be fresh, salty or brackish will be called as wetlands. Now this shows that there is no restriction on the definition of the wetlands. This is done in order to promote the conservation of the wetlands. There is only one restriction regarding the definition of the wetlands in all these areas. That whatever area are you talking about, whether it is marsh, fen, peat or waterlogged area, whether it is natural, artificial or any area, the depth of the water in that area cannot be greater than the 6-meter depth. Because if we do not lay down any such restrictions which are related to depths, just consider all the oceans will be considered as wetlands because they are permanent, natural, brackish or salty wetland areas. So that is why, obviously, with the common sense, the restriction with regard to the depth is very important in defining the wetlands. And that depth is restricted with the 6 meter as per the Ramsar Convention. But the India's Wetland Conservation Management Rules 2017 define wetlands in their own way. Though all the definition is in consonance with the Ramsar Convention, that is, all these things are also followed in the India's definition of the wetlands, but the restrictions which are posed by India are more. The 6-meter depth restriction is also followed by India. So that is why according to India, all the areas, whether it is marsh, peat, fen, bog, natural, artificial, permanent, temporary, salty, fresh, brackish, having the depth less than 6 meter, but river channels, paddy fields, and human made water bodies will be excluded from the definition of wetlands. Now, you have to keep these three things in your mind. And that is why you need to be very careful while answering the questions, especially in prelims. If the question comes on regarding the concept or definition of the wetlands, please try to read the question very carefully that what definition is it asking for. Is it asking for the definition in the context of the India's Wetland Conservation and Management Rules 2017 or the general concept of the wetlands which is there in the Ramsar Convention? Again, going forward, the human made water bodies can be the drinking water tanks, bodies which are specially created for aquaculture, salt production, or for the recreation purposes. Now, moving ahead, once we have understood the basic definition, the concept of the wetlands, and the difference between the Ramsar definitions and India's definition, now we'll look at certain key facts in relation to the India's specific wetlands. Now, this is a rough map of India, and there are certain key facts which are mentioned from this which are mentioned on this map, and you should be aware about these key facts. These facts will also help you to select or eliminate the options in your prelim examination. Moreover, these also can be used in your mains answer. So the total area of wetland in India is around 15,2600 square kilometer. But the important comparison is that the inland natural wetlands are more than the coastal natural wetlands. The inland natural wetlands constitute around 43.4% of the total area, whereas the coastal natural wetlands constitute only 24.3% of the total area. Coming to the state-wise comparison in the context of the area. Now this is very important again. You should be very careful while reading the question that whether the state-wise comparison is being asked in the context of the area or the number of sites. That is, which state is having the highest area under wetland or which state is having the highest number of Ramsar sites. So as far as the area is concerned, the Gujarat is as first position, Andhra Pradesh is at the second position, and Uttar Pradesh is the third largest in terms of area. But when it comes to the number of sites, Uttar Pradesh has the maximum Ramsar sites counting to 10. So under this topic we have discussed what are the basics of Ramsar Convention, how it defines the wetlands, and how is it different from the India's definition of the Wetland Conservation and Management Rules 2017. Then we also discussed some of the key facts related to the wetland sites and areas in India. Now we will discuss the question of the day. The question asked in yesterday's DNS was in relation to the Lokayukt. There were three statements given and you had to find the correct statement out of these three statements. The first statement said, he is appointed and removed only by the governor of the state. No, this statement is incorrect. The second says that he is powerful to put any minister under corruption inquiry. And the third statement says that duration of the Lokayukt is fixed at 5 years in every state. No, again this statement is incorrect. So 1 and 3 are incorrect and that is why A, that is 2 only, is the correct answer. The question for the day for today's DNS is in relation to the 1961 Madrid Protocol. This term seen sometimes in news is related to which of the following? You have to find the correct options out of the given 4 options.